All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. My name is Autumn Riggenbaugh, and I am the marketing specialist at IT Staffing Recruiting for Motion Recruitment, the founder and sponsor of Tech in Motion events, our international tech event series. For those of you who are new to our community, Tech in Motion is a community-driven event series with a goal to bring the tech community together to share ideas and inspire one another. We as organizers of Tech in Motion have been listening and observing recent discussions happening within our local tech communities and wanted to use our platform to amplify these important conversations and provide resources for our network of tech leaders and professionals. As a result, we've decided to host our event today, How to Ensure a Diverse and Inclusive Work Culture. As many of you know, Tech in Motion hosts an annual Timmy Awards highlighting tech companies creating positive and inclusive work environments for their employees. Categories including Best Tech Work Culture and Best Tech Workplace for Diversity. We've selected members from our community who have been recognized in these areas to help provide you with tactics for planning, deploying, monitoring, and improving diversity and inclusion strategies. A few quick housekeeping notes before we kick off. You'll notice that you have all joined the webinar in listen-only mode. Feel free to submit questions and comments in the chat box on the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll do our best to address them during the Q&A session. Today's webinar will also be available on demand after the live session ends. You'll receive a link via email to view the video. I think that's all from me, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Anastasia Simon. Anastasia is an experienced content marketer and startup advisor with passion for storytelling. Before she joined the Shadow Ventures team, managing director of Shadow Labs, where she advises and develops programming for over 30 early startups. She leaned into her passion for storytelling, cultural savvy, and obsession with emerging tech as a means of connecting brands with consumers. She also worked with leading fashion and lifestyle brands on multi-channel influencer campaigns designed to drive awareness around specific products and experiences. All right, Anastasia, I'll let you take it from here.
All right, thanks, Autumn. So yeah, everything Autumn said is just a fancy way of saying I'm a marketer by trade who started out in the fashion world, fashion and lifestyle brand, and moved into technology. I've been working with high growth tech startups in the Atlanta area for about the past 5 years now, which kind of led me to my role at Shadow Ventures, which is a VC firm based in Atlanta, where I manage an incubator of over 60 startups focused on architecture, engineering, construction, and commercial real estate. So just to give you guys kind of a high level overview of all the fancy words and jargon, you know, in my bio. So with that, I'm gonna introduce our panelists. So we have Adana Garrett, Eric Smith, and Shanna Sanford. So Adana, if you can kick us off, go over your quick bio, introduce everybody, and we can go from there.
Sure. My name is Adana Garrett, as Anastasia said, and I work at West Rock, which is headquartered here in Atlanta. I live in the suburbs of Atlanta and Alpharetta. West Rock actually provides a lot of paper and cardboard, corrugated cardboard products. So we provide boxes for Amazon. We make the boxes that Chick-fil-A puts your chicken nuggets in. We make boxes for Domino's, Papa John's, a lot of those brands that you're familiar with. I work in the IT space. I am a senior manager over the enterprise applications and architecture that support our organization, so finance, HR, some of the bigger platforms. And I've been at West Rock for a year and a half now, and glad to be on the panel today.
All right, thanks, Adana. Shanna, if you'd like to go next.
Hi, I'm Shanna, and my background is in PR and marketing. My company is Control S Communications, and we provide diversity training along with a suite of other services to startups and small businesses, largely in the tech industry. And actually, one of my clients was part of the Timmy Awards Trust a Bit. And I'm originally from Los Angeles. I now live in Orange County, and I'm happy to be here.
Thanks. And last but not least, Eric Smith.
Thanks, Anastasia, and thanks, Tech in Motion. I think before I introduce myself, I'm going to take a step back and extend my thoughts and prayers to everybody out there who's dealing with COVID-19, as well as the racial injustices that's going on in the United States. Eric Smith, I work at PTC. PTC is a global software company that's located in the Boston area. We do a lot of things, but to kind of sum it up, we help companies like NASA, GE, US Army, Lululemon, BMW create, operate, and service their products throughout our technology software offerings. I'm at PTC as a global inclusion and diversity senior specialist, and I'm happy to be here on this Tech in Motion event. And actually last year we won Tech in Motion Diversity in the Workplace Award for the Boston area. So happy to provide some insights.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric, for that, and for also that moment to kind of pause and reflect on everything that's going on in our country. Because as I've seen it, as we've all seen it kind of said several times, we're facing 2 pandemics right now. And I think a lot of us have been facing one of them for a little bit longer than some people have acknowledged. And that kind of brings us to where we are, what our conversation is going to be about. As Autumn mentioned, with everything going on current events wise, I think diversity, equity, and inclusion have been pushed to the forefront as far as the conversation that needs to be had across all sectors. Technology, I feel, has been kind of immune from having a real meaningful conversation around this. So I think right now this is the perfect time to kind of dig into that. So if you guys, we can get started. Let's first talk about, what does diversity and inclusion look like in technology today? So who wants to take it?
Yeah, I'll jump in to get us started. So I think that today, diversity and inclusion in the tech space, quite honestly, looks like a lot of the other spaces. There are smatterings all over of a lot of diverse and inclusive groups, but they may be more in tech than other areas for reasons that they need to utilize those skills and those resources from a costing perspective, but not necessarily a concerted effort to get those resources there for their quality and knowledge. So, I mean, you look out in the world, we have pretty much every genre person there, but is there a quantity? That's really kind of the question, right, that we need to be looking at now.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on what Adana said, I think the conversation is not just in terms of quantity, but in terms of level of what we're seeing from a diversity and inclusion standpoint. When it comes to making decisions and it comes to developing a strategy, is there diversity and inclusion at the top level to help out with that strategy? I don't think so. I think it's moving in the right direction. I think companies are moving and moving towards promoting and obviously hiring a certain amount of group. But right now, it's not that perfect standpoint. But I think I'm optimistic about the industry right now, because we're recognizing that it is something that 21% of companies that companies that have gender diversity have 21% likely more chance to outperform, and then companies that have ethnic diversity has 33% chance to outperform their competitors. So companies are starting to understand it. So it gives me a bright spot. But right now, the leadership is just not there in terms of those levels. So that's my comment on the tech industry itself.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you, Eric. And I do think that the industry is going in the right direction. Another thing I want to point out is that even the companies who are focusing on diversity and who are hiring in more diverse talent, there's still a wage disparity. So that also as an issue that we have. So it's sort of, they say one step at a time, but that's something that we don't want to forget, is that we want to make sure that diverse talent is also paid their worth. And that's something that companies need to look at as well.
I also think it would be helpful in this conversation to pull back, because I think we say diversity and inclusion, or diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And people understand, but they don't really understand the differences between those words and how that translates across the board when it comes to your hiring and the way that you promote. So who wants to kind of take the initiative to break down our definitions today.
Yeah, I can take a stab at it, and
Okay.
I'm actually gonna do you one better and tell you how we look at it at PTC. So a lot of people call it diversity and inclusion, and it's awesome. We flip the words a little bit. We call it inclusion diversity, and the reason why we start with inclusion is first and foremost, this is not a check in a box, right? We're not just doing this to appease somebody. We're doing this because we really care about our culture and really care about the people who are in our company in the first spot, right? So we're not just hiring to make a number. We already have a certain amount of individuals at our company that we want to see get promoted. We want to see strive and do better. So we start with inclusion. And what our definition of inclusion is are you able to come to work every day and be your authentic self? Are you able to come to work every day and like for me, for example, I have a short sleeve shirt on, I can show my tattoos. Am I able to go comfortably into these meetings with, let's say, my CEO and him not judge me on that, right? So that's what we think about in terms of inclusion. You come to work as your true authentic self without any backlash or anything like that. And that goes for all races, all different backgrounds or anything like that. When it comes to diversity, it's those backgrounds, right? So we can talk about race, we can talk about gender, we can talk about sexual orientation. But we look at it a little deeper too as well, because there's a diversity wheel, and we can include religious beliefs, we can include economic background, we can include anything from that standpoint. So it's really just, we think about it as a differing opinion, but we also think about it as what do you bring to the table that somebody else doesn't bring to the table, right? And then we can dive in even more into intersectionality and go from there, but that's just our general definition in terms of that. And in terms of equity, the way we look at equity is, are you being paid the same amount doing the same job as somebody else? And we take equity a step further when it comes to performance reviews. Are you being reviewed the same as your peers, right? Are you getting the same due process that your peers would get if your manager's white and your peers white? Are you getting the same due process in terms of that performance review? So that's how we look at it here at PTC, and I'd be interested to see what Adana and Shana thinks.
Yeah, I guess from a West Rock perspective, I would say pretty much everything that you stated, Eric, is spot on. We are really just now diving into our DE&I pathways with a dedicated leader that we brought on probably about 9 months ago, who is dedicated to that. We're starting up our resource groups currently. And so we're really trying to define how that actually looks for us, because I think from a definition perspective, exactly what you said is true, right? Inclusion is making sure that I feel that I am part of this space inherently, right? I belong here, whatever that looks like for you. Diversity is being able to look around the room and just seeing, feeling, and having conversations that are different day to day, person to person, location to location. That you see it, you can feel it in the things that are done. You also can pay attention to it in all areas of how the company operates. And then, of course, equity, right? We want everybody to be able to feel like that what they brought to the table gives them the same access as well as the same reward to everybody else. So we're kind of digging into that now, trying to really figure out, okay, so now how do we act on that? Like, so you say the words, now what do you do to actually make it actionable so that you can do those things? It's kind of where we are right now. Oh.
Sorry, I lost my connection.
Oh, okay.
I needed some IT help. Get back on.
So yeah, so we were just going over those, what those words mean within your company, your structure, and how you guys work as a team. So anything that you would like to add, Shana, around
Sorry,
diversity?
what was that?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. How are you all internally with your team defining that, and then with some of the clients perhaps that you're working with?
Oh yeah, of course. So I am, as of now, I'm a solo a founder of my company, so I'm a team of one. But a lot of the companies that I work with, when we work on diversity, and sorry, when I dropped off, we were talking about the differences between diversity versus inclusion, and we really discussed one, the difference between the two, but how to incorporate diversity and make sure everyone feels sort of a sense of belonging. And that's really a large part of the dialogue that we're having around surrounding including these practices in business practices.
Got it, got it. I think so. Adana, going back to what you were saying about making things actionable, that kind of leads me into our next set of questions. So how can tech leaders kind of change up their hiring practices to attract diverse candidates?
So I guess since I made the statement, I'll go ahead and start. So I would say the first thing, and this is something that I have, stated to my leadership, is that before they even start down the steps, we need to be very clear about what our goal and intention is, right? So in order to get to the right action, I need you to be intentional. You need to have put some thought into exactly what are you trying to get. Are you looking for numbers? Are you looking for a pipeline? Are you looking for leadership? Are you looking for quality? Are you looking for all of those things? And then what do those things look like when you break them down? Because each of those may take a different tact in terms of steps that you're going to use to create that type of environment. Because what I have seen in other companies, and even some of my organizations, is that they want to take on diversity and inclusion and equity, but they're not really clear what their real goal is, other than bringing in numbers of different racially ethnic backgrounds, or disabled or handicapable folks. Those are things you can see, but again, is that really your goal, just to bring the numbers in? Because that's probably not going to get you the company benefit that you really want to realize. So the first step, at least for me, that I would say is make sure that you have a clear intention behind what you're doing. And it doesn't have to be grandiose. I mean, you don't have to cure cancer, right? This is a thing that is going to take decades. So tomorrow you can't fix it. But start being very clear and focused and being intentional about what it is that you're really trying to do.
And I like that you brought that up. If I could just speak to that a little bit, I like that you mentioned being specific and being intentional. One thing that I always tell my clients is to set up goals, right? So I see a lot of companies that are 4% diverse, 3% diverse. And also I'll say we have to be careful with that, because some companies will include women in diversity, right? And so they'll say we're 40% diverse, meaning we have 40% women. But when you look at minority representation, we're still under 10. We're at 5%. We're at 7%. So some of the things that we need to do are set up goals. Okay, we're at 4% diverse. We want to get to, let's say, we want to do 20% and actually work on that. And what I always say is it's not going to be easy. You can't go your usual channels because you'll end up with the same result, right? So you have to push harder. Look at different organizations, partner with them. Look at college organizations who represent minority students, things like that. So companies have to change what they're doing to bring in talent in order to goals that they set.
Yeah, and just to build upon what was talked about, just stating the business case to the leaders and getting that buy-in, and that's the first step that Shannon and Donna talked about. But it goes even wider than that. Like, looking at our job descriptions, like, do we really need to have 10 bullets on our job descriptions for an entry-level candidate role, right? Do we really need that? Do we really need to have 20 years of experience for a senior level person, right? So looking at that and making sure we're not excluding anybody, and that's to bring diversity into the equation. Because again, I think if a woman doesn't feel she fits 90% of the criteria, she's not going to apply, right? So you just knocked out a few people right there. And then from under the minority candidate, it's the same thing. I mean, we're not just going to apply to any job if we don't feel like we fit it. We're going to move on to the next one. So that's a way from a diversity standpoint. And then from an inclusive standpoint, I mean, most companies have a diverse background in there somewhere. Set up sessions and just listen. Like what do you need from me? What do you need from me as a leader in terms of how can I support you? How can I support your community? Do focus groups and Adana mentioned employee resource groups. Employee resource groups are awesome in terms of the journey about building this diverse and inclusive environment. A few years back, I gave an anecdote for PTC. In 2016, we had, I think it was 3 or 4 employee resource groups. It's 2020 now, we have 12, right? And it goes over a whole different types of diverse backgrounds, not just the race and the gender, but it includes like veterans and neurodiversity, which is our SMART group, and it goes from a wide range. So fostering an environment where you're able to have those employee resource groups and have your group, kind of grassroots lead it, but you as a leader have to take a step down and be a part of that change and be their champions and help them out with that.
And I want to add one quick thing that you guys made me think of in this same conversation is that in looking at your goals and being intentional, I also think that work environments and teams have to recognize when they see those gaps that even those gaps may be intentional, right? Understand why that gap is even there, because in your workplace, there may be some gaps that really are benefiting you, and you don't even know why. And you may be, like I found that I tried to change something that resources in my organization were doing that logically didn't make any sense. I'm a process person, I look at details. I had to step back and say, okay, wait a minute. So this isn't benefiting me, but maybe it's benefiting them, and be okay with that, right? There are some things that they're there and you need to understand why they're there and be good with that, because I think part also that can hurt you is that looking at diversity and inclusion and now you want to change everything because you feel like that's the new thing to do, which, trust me, I'm not knocking it, because I think that we need more diverse thought in people. But then there's also opportunities where we need to scale it back some and say, okay, wait, this space may not be the one that we want to do that in, and be okay with that. It's not a bad thing. Just accept it for what it is, and then go put your energy into the areas that really need it.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. To really kind of step back and say, why are things the way they are first? What is the intention there to change? Like, why do we need to change? What are we changing? So when we're talking about, Eric, you mentioned like internal resource groups. You also mentioned earlier about the need for diversity among higher leadership. And how that can kind of contribute to some of the issues within a company not having diversity amongst leadership. What are some other things that tech leaders can do to create a more diverse and inclusive work environment? So we're talking company culture, not just the hiring.
Are you going to go to me?
Yeah,
so
it's not for you. I was just riffing off of what you said, but whoever wants to jump in, I'm all about it's popcorn style,
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, the employee resource groups and just focus group sessions as well. I would say not just from a leader standpoint, but I'm very wary when it comes to diversity training, because again, it has a negative connotation to it, and just trying to embed inclusion into everything you do, right? So when you're thinking about inclusion from a manager level, something as simple as if a manager is sending an email to a group of their employees and they start to email with, "Hey guys, I'm just excluded out of your woman population, right? So using inclusive language, but as an organization, we need to teach what inclusive language is, right? We need to teach what unconscious bias is. We need to teach all what that is to equip our people, not just our leaders, but equip your peers, your manager, somebody who's cross-functional to be inclusive, right? Because again, like we're talking about leaders here, but in terms of everyday thing, if I come to work and somebody says something who's on my level that I don't really agree with, I'm gonna think, and nobody checks that person for what they said, I'm gonna think it's not an inclusive environment for me, right? So to be able to, again, stay away from training, but to be able to embed it in everything you do. So when you have, I know you have manager leadership trainings at some of your companies, just embed that in there as well, in terms of just saying, hey, we're going to talk about unconscious bias, we're going to talk about inclusive language, we're going to talk about how to have inclusive meetings, right? In terms of not having one person overpower the meeting, or not having one person just take over the entire meeting, right? How can we train our individuals on that? So there's just a little bit of tidbits on that.
Okay.
I like what you said there, because what's important to realize is that if you hire in the talent, but you don't build it out in your company culture, those employees are not going to be there. So I really like that you brought that up. And another thing I want to say is that companies look for culture fit. And I think we have to be careful with that too, because we don't want it to become, I'm looking for a candidate who is like me. So it's important to do a culture fit for your company versus a culture fit for yourself.
Yeah, and I would just to talk about the culture fit thing. I think companies should move away from the culture fit and more go into culture add, right? Are you adding to this culture that we want to build? And if the culture you want to build is an inclusive and diverse culture, they're going to be a culture add. So I think companies, when we're talking about this, we're talking about culture additions, not culture fits.
Yeah,
I like that.
and I love that you brought that up, Shanna, because I think too often culture fit actually is, are we going to be friends? And it's less about, do you fit the culture of the business? It's more like, will you and I have a beer together? And I think what you see, particularly in tech, and I know this has been brought up a lot around gender inclusive, is that it's ping pong tables and beer on tap and all these like things that are very male oriented, like stereotypically male. Whereas women will say things like, so what is your parental leave policy? Or, hey, I actually have to nurse. So where do I go and do that? And the person who set up the company culture was thinking friends, and we're going to all be bros, not how do I create an inclusive environment for people that I bring onto the team, you know? And so I think that's super important that you brought that up, because what I've experienced, it's not how do you add to the culture of the company, it's how can you and I hang out and have a beer after work. I love my coworkers, but like I have friends, you know?
And I would say, Anastasia, on that note, also that, when you're building that culture, again, be mindful that it is, to Eric's point, more of an add. How does this person add to what we already have, and not necessarily just be part of the wallpaper? And that there should be an ability to understand that also needs to adjust, right? You build your culture, but I think what we do in a lot of companies is we build this culture and then we feel like we must stick with it forever until the end of time. So then as you start doing that culture fit, then 10 years later, even though everyone else outside of the company has changed, your company is still the same, but you're saying, I want younger, more exciting, more innovative talent, but your culture is still the 10 years ago culture, and you're not willing to let that culture adjust over time, right? So I think that's also part of a inclusivity and diverse and equity model, that you have to understand that this is a fluid process all the way around. It's never going to be stagnant, and we have to get out of that mindset, not only in people, but in culture, that we have to be able to see the value in every little nuance as it changes day by day, not decade by decade, which is how we've always done it, right?
Right. I think it goes to the whole startup adage around innovate or die. It's like you have to disrupt yourself. And sometimes it's not the product, it's disrupting the way that you approach building your team and building your company and the environment that you've set up. So what tools and resources can tech leaders lean on to explore and celebrate team difference?
Okay, so tools and resources. I mean, first of all, your biggest tool and resource are going to be the people that's in your company. You know, ask them first. And I say that at a time where in a lot of companies, especially for Black employees, some of us are mentally tired and we don't want you to ask us, right? So I say that understanding that you may get a no if you ask the resource because they're like, I can't. Like today is not going to be your day, right? But the people that are there, you brought them in as an asset to help you build your company. They also are an asset to help you build the culture, the diversity, the inclusivity, and the equity. They're not just a monolithic you know, standby that comes in to do said job and then they're out the door. They have other interests, so ask them first. I think that another tool that, you know, that a lot of companies, they utilize from a financial perspective is that they will give money to organizations. But I feel like that a great tool for them is to actually find a partnership with an organization that has that thing that you know you lack and you want to do better at, because they have been in the trenches and they can tell you exactly how they can help you to get that thing, right? So companies are good at saying, I'm going to give you $50,000 for this grant or that. And they may even come and do a project with you, you know, making sandwiches or giving STEM classes to the kids. But let's dig a little deeper. Understand what are the give and takes between your organization in terms of how they can actually help you build what you want to build.
Yeah, you hit that right on the head in terms of that partnership. And I've seen a lot of companies just donate money, and as our company, we donate money to certain organizations. But some of these companies, they miss the partnership part, right? They just think, hey, it's a check in a box, we get your name on the website. And what they'll find is that the partnership is actually worth more than the money that they gave, right? Because at the end of the day, you're solving a lot of things. First and foremost, if something else happens and another George Floyd thing happens and your employees they're just emotionally drained and they don't want to talk about this. You have a resource to go to that's non-biased in terms of what's going on in your company, and they can give you some tips, and they would know the different organizations around the country or the world that's able to help out or to their best practices, right? Number two, everybody wants to talk about the pipeline issue. And I'm going to give a shout out to the National Society of Black Engineers. If you want to talk about the pipeline issue, solve the pipeline issue, right? And actually show up to those kids and actually bring those kids to your campuses and show them what technology looks like to inspire them to, you know, solve your pipeline issue for you, right? And again, people miss out on the partnership piece of it. And I see a lot more companies actually getting better at it. But again, shout out to the National Society of Black Engineers. They really say, okay, we're happy with the money, but we want to make sure you do the work. We want to make sure that you show up for these kids every day. We want to make sure that these kids do have a job coming out of college, and not just we're just going to be happy with that, right? Another tools out there, and I don't know if there's any CEOs on here, but PwC, they do a CEO in action, and there's resources on that website that has every single company that signed up for it. I think it's over 100 signatories, where they lay out what they do for diversity and inclusion, like right on their website. So we have something on there. PwC has something on there. Like a lot of top companies have signed it, and their CEOs, they sit around and they share best practices. That's a great tool to use. And I highly encourage any CEOs on here or anybody who has a CEO who's interested in getting more involved in inclusion and diversity to go to that pledge and look at the best practice and even sign it themselves and commit to it, right? If you're able to commit to that, you're committed to your employees that you're going to move forward with this on on a outwardly facing and something that can be held accountable to. And then again, like Adana said, again, I know it's tougher with some employees, but the biggest tool is the employees, right? Even before a George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery thing happens, do you have a relationship with them, right? Are you talking with them every day? So when this does come up, you're already saying, hey, I hear you, like I'm with you, and I stand with you. And then on top of it, not just the employees who are owners, minority or women, what about their allies? Like those are some tools and resources too, right? Because you can't be at every single meeting, but if you have great allies for those individuals, they'll help you. They'll be your biggest tool because they're going to advocate for those owners, minorities. If as a leader you're not in that room, to be there and advocate for that. So.
Yeah, I like that. And can we go back to the pipeline problem? That's not real, people. That's not a real thing. It doesn't exist. Like you just mentioned, National Society of Black Engineers. I know several female friends that I have who are members of that, who are different types of engineers across what that broad term means. If you are not getting diverse candidates from your recruiters, you may need to think about, to Eric's point earlier in the call, your job description. It could be, are you always looking for candidates from the same schools? If the schools that you look at are always like Stanford, Columbia, Harvard, you're always looking at certain types of schools, they're only going to keep bringing you a certain type of candidate. And sometimes you may need to stop and say, hey, what about a candidate from an HBCU? Or what about a candidate from a great state school, you know? So sometimes there's implicit bias at work, so because there's no shortage of Black tech talent. And it's just fundamentally, it's about, I think they said for 2016 it was about 6% of graduating seniors were Black people in STEM with STEM degrees. That's not millions of people, but it's enough. You know, it's enough that I should never walk into, particularly in Atlanta, I should never walk into a startup in a city that is 50% Black, where you have historically Black universities, where you have Black students at tech, and the team is 80% white. That should never happen. You know. So let's see.
I just want to really quick, all great points, but I wanted to go back. Eric, you mentioned talking about diversity on websites, and I just want to say sometimes it takes sort of stepping outside yourself and putting yourself in the shoes of a potential candidate. So if I'm looking at your website, or even if you have branding materials, if your company has any kind of brochure or anything like that, and there's no diversity representation, or you don't talk about a commitment to diversity, even your social media, then people are going to look at your company and evaluate it based on that and say, well, I don't see anything about a commitment to diversity. I don't see diverse team members. I don't see diverse leadership. So this is not a company committed to diversity. So you really have to look at it, you know, at all levels.
Yeah. And I also want to just add a side note to that, and anybody's listening in terms of this. This does not mean you find stock photos and put stock photos on your website, right? You're not mislead people when it comes to the representation at your company. You really want to use real photos of real people to build that culture. So if you do have a area of improvement when it comes to a certain amount of say unrepresented minorities, and you don't have as many, or you don't have any at all, I would strongly suggest that you do not put a stock photo of a black man or black woman, because the black candidate is going to come in and say, oh, like, so where's all the Black employees? You just misled that candidate. So my recommendation is just to be honest, right? And when they come in for the interview, just be honest, saying we're working on it, and we're hoping to get to a certain spot. But these are real employees, and hopefully as time goes along, you can use real, say, women, Black employees, Latino, Hispanic employees from that standpoint. Just a little tidbit for everybody out there who was rushing to the stock photo page and trying to find the first Hispanic Latino they could add to their page.
For sure. That's a good one, Eric. Yes. For sure.
Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that. We know.
Get off of them, Splash.
No. But So I think, you know, at this point, I feel like we've kind of hit on pretty much everything as far as it comes to those action items. But as we all know, when you take action, you have to measure it, and you have to put goals in place. So how can we ensure the effectiveness of our D&I initiatives? What measurements, what KPIs should we be looking at?
Yeah, I can go for that, and I'll flip it on the inclusion and I&D side of things. From an inclusion standpoint, I hope most companies have great HR data and they can look at retention, right? What's your retention numbers in terms of a certain group? So in terms of women, what's the rate of retention for women at your company compared to the rest of the population, right? So looking at that and then understanding why it's like that. And nitpicking and going through not only the actual retention numbers, but I'm sure most companies here, they do survey data and nitpicking on that survey data to see why is this person or why is this group of people leaving? And Glint survey is a great resource for that. You're able to see why this person is not feeling away, like they feel like they can't be authentic at work, and you can develop action plans for that for the following year. So I would say retention numbers from an inclusion standpoint, as well as using that survey data as well, and then obviously promotions and making sure that's tracked too. And then when it comes to diversity, I caution myself to say that you need to, you know, have this target and you want to hire this many people for that, because that gets into quota, and it gets into, are you really doing this for the right reason, or are you doing this to check a box? So I caution around that, but obviously you want to make sure from a recruiting aspect, are you interviewing the diverse slates, right? Do you have in your final round at least 50% diverse candidates? I think there's a stat here, and hopefully I have the numbers right. But when it comes to female candidates, if there's 2 or more in the final process, they're 78 times more likely to get hired. When it comes to a minority, another minority, and there are 2 or more in the final process, I think it's 198 times more likely to get hired, right? So when we talk about this, we're not saying you need to hire all these people, you need to interview them, right? You need to interview them, give them a fair shake, make sure they you know, fit the role and fit what you're looking for. Not just hire them to hire them, because then again, it's gonna be a revolving door that's going in and out in terms of your company. So just a little bit of tidbits there.
Yeah, I agree with everything Eric said. I would also add in, even though I definitely agree with quotas for hiring, I think that gets to be a slippery slope when you want to try to be authentic and actually start having some inclusive conversations, because now you're more concentrating on the numbers. But I think from a quota perspective in supplier diversity, I think that definitely needs to be something that every company needs to be tracking. What, you know, how diverse is your supplier list, and what are the quantities of items you are purchasing from them, right? Because I do know that there are companies who go out and seek diverse companies that they can support, but the volume that they push through those companies is significantly less than the volumes that they've been using for their traditional companies. So again, I'm checking the box, but is that really moving the needle? So not only just looking at your suppliers, but how much are you actually engaging with them, and how much business are you actually giving them relative to the community that you support, right? Not an arbitrary number. Look at the community of the businesses that you are actually supporting. What is the mix of that environment, and how does your then vendor supplier diversity match that? Because it should be fairly equal, because you should be putting into the community as much as you are taking out of it.
I like what everyone said, and I'm actually a huge proponent of the number. I feel like what we measure, we will make happen. So I really believe in setting those goals, but I also agree you should not be hiring diversity just to hire diversity, right? You want to make sure that it's still someone who's a fit for the company and the position and all of that, obviously. But another thing I wanted to say is I'm also a huge proponent when it comes to measuring the successfulness of your D&I practices of the check-in, right? And it seems really simple, but you learn a lot from just sitting down with someone, and just whether you're a manager or a team member, and just saying, hey, how's everything going? How are you adjusting? A new team member, and even for team members who have been there for a while, just checking in with them every now and then on a regular basis. You know, I see companies do weekly check-ins or monthly check-ins, and you can really learn a lot. Also, exit interviews. And, you know, unfortunately, you might not be able to help that team member who is exiting, but you can learn a lot that you can change about your company for future candidates and in future recruiting and hiring practices, just to see, okay, this is someone who is exiting the company. They have no reason to hold back, and really don't discount that. Give it some weight, really evaluate what they're saying, and see how the company can change the practices to make future candidates feel more included, or you know, just absolve whatever grievances that person had.
Yeah.
I like that. I kind of love, Adana, that you took it back to your supplier network, because I think a lot of times when we talk DE&I, we are talking mostly about your team and not thinking about the suppliers that you work with, your vendors, and the other people who are part of your business's ecosystem. So I think that is super important for companies to make a commitment to saying, we're going to have so many minority-owned businesses as suppliers and working toward that goal. And like you said, not just having them, but having them and using them, you know, and not just saying we're going to hire this many women or people of color, or however they want to break that down as their quotas, but saying we want to bring in people who are the best fit and genuinely meet it. Because I think that's what it comes down to. A lot of times people say, I'm bringing in the best candidate, but they may not have even entertained the best candidate, to Eric's point, because you didn't interview the two women who applied because you didn't like the way her voice sounded on the phone, or she had a very thick Indian accent, and you were afraid people would feel like we're outsourcing our sales. These are actual examples from companies I've worked with, so I'm not making this up. You know, and so you have those kinds of things happen, and that person may have been the best candidate, but because they were a non-native English speaker, which was not part of the job description or a requirement in any way, your decision was, I don't even want to entertain her. You know, so I think it goes to having that commitment to what is best for the company. And there are statistics, it's Google, that having more diverse teams leads to a better return on investment for your business. You know, so before we get into questions really quickly, does anyone have any final thoughts that they would like to offer?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think just to reflect, it's not going to happen overnight in terms of people who want the success. It's going to take years and years, and I think even Adana said decades. But it's not the amount of time it takes. It's just making sure you put the effort in every single day, right? Making sure you're being as inclusive as possible every single day. Make sure you're doing the right actions every single day. Again, it could take forever for you to get to the 50-50 of whatever you're looking for, but doing it every single day and making sure it's authentic in every single day will get you there. And understand it's a journey, right? It's not one of those, hey, we made a sale, that's it, we can close a quarter. It's going to happen quarter after quarter after quarter after quarter. And you just have to put intent behind it and make sure that intent is authentic.
Yep. My closing would just be intentional. Like, that's the thing that I have pressed on my company. Please do not include us in conversations because you want to check off that you actually had the conversation, or now you reached the 50% mark. Again, what is your intention? Because that's going to drive you even getting the right responses and the right quality, right? Be intentional.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And all I would say is that similar to what you two have shared, is that it's really about authenticity, and authenticity shows. And I think that the way to make sure that you are being authentic is to practice these things in your daily lives. right? Educate yourselves on these issues. Make sure that you check your own unconscious biases in your personal lives, and that'll translate, because you'll come in as an employee, as a manager, as a director, as an executive who has done the work and who understands these things from a personal perspective and can translate them into the workplace. So I think really make it a part of your life, and that's the best way to be authentic, is to just really practice what you preach.
You gotta walk it like you talk it.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
So we have a question from Claire. Often candidates are excluded because they don't fit into the culture. We talked about this kind of earlier. How can companies make diversity / differences we value when evaluating candidates? So how can they communicate that? I'm going to assume is what she's saying.
How can the company communicate their
that they value? And I think that goes to what we were saying earlier about the website, the language, things like that. So what are some other ways companies can kind of communicate to potential candidates that this is a place for you to fit, that you do fit the culture here?
I always say it's, yeah, that is a good question. I always say really it's about how you say it, you know, and I would love to know more about what the reservation is about the description of the culture that someone feel excluded, but I think it's really just about how you say it and how you position it. I don't think it really matters what your company describes as its culture. It's how you present it and how you weave inclusivity into it and into the description.
Yeah, and I think actions in this instance speak louder than words. So you can communicate all you want, but what are you really doing for, let's say, that community you're looking to bring upon, right? In terms of from a women's standpoint, are you investing in your women in general, in terms of sending them to certain conferences and make sure they have the right promotion? Are you investing in girls who code or black girls code? Are you investing in those things? So I think in this instance, for a good way a company can communicate it is actions speak louder than words, and money speaks even louder if you want to do the donation route. But action do speak louder than words in terms of making sure that you're actually, you know, helping that community, not just that employee that you're trying to get, but the community that the employee represents.
See what else we got. Where can I find statistics to present to an employer that'll help me leverage for a better position? They're getting the data to kind of back up, hey, I should be moved into this position or this role.
So, I mean, I will tell you one of the sites that I use a lot. I don't know if they would have data specifically for whatever this role is, but I go a lot to the, let me get it right, National Center for Women in Information Technology. They keep a lot of statistics. They drive a lot of information. And it's NCIWT. You can literally go out there and they have spreadsheets of statistics, and it's not like an eye chart. They actually make it readable so that you can see, and it crosses, you know, all kind of demographics. So they'll have it broken down by men, by women, by disability, by region, roles, levels, you know, all kind of information. And it's very user friendly. So, you know, I use that a lot of times when I'm talking to different groups to say, you know, hey, check some of these numbers out. How do you guys fit against these numbers? And would you rather improve upon these numbers, or, you know, are you worse than these numbers?
Yeah. Somebody else dropped in the chat looking at Glassdoor, LinkedIn, salary.com. I can say anytime I've been going for a promotion, that's kind of where I start, as it relates to asking for more money, because you have to ask. People don't give you what you don't ask for. So this is a good one. What are some tactics that small companies, so we're saying under 100 people, can take particularly when there aren't many job openings or a critical mass of employee resource groups.
So in terms of taking to become more diverse, is that what you're trying to say there? Yeah, I mean, so I'm a big believer that small company, big company is still the same actions, right? You can still do the same thing. You can still go to HBCUs. You can still go to those different conferences. I would also say that maybe partnering with a bigger company and learning from a bigger company. So if you go to another company or if you have a relationship with like a customer or a partner, and kind of understanding how they work, and maybe even setting up like different panels to understand that and cross collaborate with that. But in terms of what we talk about from a big company standpoint, it can be used for a smaller company standpoint in terms of building that, right? Because if you don't have anybody, like how can you build that? I think the tips that we gave throughout this call will help you build that.
Yeah. And I would say that probably at a smaller company, you have a lot more flexibility to build better partnerships that are way deeper and way more impactful than a larger company, because you guys can actually establish some relationship. And the biggest impediment to having a successful DE&I platform is the lack of true relationship building, because you can't improve on what you don't understand. So if you don't even understand the relationships that you have, whether they're again are based on gender, race, ethnicity, ability, education, whatever it is, then you can't improve upon that because you don't even know what you have. But if you're at a smaller company, you guys can actually dig in and really have some connection that at a bigger company, honestly, I think they wish they could do more of. They just got to keep the machine rolling a lot of times. So I would piggyback on what Eric said, that you have the same things you can do at a bigger company, but I think you even have the advantage that you can do more because you can just dive. Pick an area and just dive into it.
Any advice for employees starting an employee resource group? What should we be thinking about? What should we try to avoid?
Yeah, I can
Eric and Shannon take that one.
I can take that one. So I guess I'll give a couple tidbits on employee resource groups. They're awesome, but I will say that I would avoid thinking that it's just oh yeah, I'm an employee resource group and that's it. If you want to be a leader, it takes some work, and I don't want anybody here to think oh, I'm just a part of this and I can just dedicate 10% of my time to it and it's going to work out well. I would make sure that you understand that it is kind of a second job if you really wanted to get pushed up, really get pushed forward, right? So that's one thing. Another thing is that to make sure you have a good team around you, right? And if you go on certain websites or type up like ERG structure, there's a lot of different structures of how you can structure ERG, but there shouldn't only be one person run the ERG. You want to have a team around you that has the same beliefs as you to help you work through that. And then just some basic knowledge in terms of like how the ERG is going to start out. So for example, if it was a Black ERG, you're going to do a lot of events around Martin Luther King Day, and a lot of events around Black History Month, and a lot of events around Juneteenth. And your first year might just be events and celebrations and all that. But then as you gravitate and graduate, your second year should be about, okay, what are we doing to impact the business? What are we doing to impact more employees here in terms of that? So those are little tidbits. But I would look at the 4C model if you're thinking about building ERG. They help out with that, and I have some information too as well. But if you just type in how to build employee resource groups, I know Diversity Inc., Diversity Best Practice Inc., they have something good there, and other sites have some good resources of how to build out an employee resource group. But I will say it's not easy work. It is not easy work at all.
Just realized I was still muted. That is like the phrase of the day. I'm still muted, or what else? Can you see my screen? That's what everybody.
Can you see my screen? How about now?
Great. It's like, no, I can't. I don't want to see it. So I think a good question for us to kind of as we're wrapping up, and sorry, my dog has been asleep the whole time and decided to wake up. Why is anonymized hiring not a thing? It seems fairly easy for there to be a platform that conceals names, gender, so the stuff that would be identifiers for possible reasons people could discriminate against you. Technically, none of that information is relevant unless we're doing a background check. So why has that not been more widely adopted?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I can't answer why it's not a thing, but I come from like I said, a PR and marketing background, and I know, especially PR, a lot of PR professionals are very much so about being in person and actually meeting and about energy. And I understand that across the board. I understand you want to have a certain energy with people who are you going to be working with and potentially supervising and things like that. So I do understand that. But I can also see the other side of it is that some things aren't necessary. But my guess would be it's not a thing because people want to meet you and speak to you and get a sort of a feel of your energy. It's even weird to say meet because now everything's virtual, but but you know, there's something to be said about the energy that you get from a person. So
Yeah, I think in the first initial round when you're sourcing for resumes and you take the name off and you're just looking at experience and background, I think that would probably be the only round that would be used for, and maybe that's not beneficial for a company to spend X amount of money on that platform, because I mean the biases don't come until you actually see the person and talk to the person. You got to talk to the person at some point, right? You're not just going to be just a email back and forth and you get a job. Like, you're going to have to end up talking to the person. So maybe in the first round, I don't see any issue with just looking at resumes with no name on it. But once you come into like in-person interview or like Skype, WebEx interviews, that's when it gets tricky, because I mean you're not going to want to talk to an avatar, right? You want to actually talk to the person and build that relationship. So and I think that's where the bias training comes into effect to kind of eliminate to eliminate that. So yeah, it's a good question. It's an interesting question, and I don't know, maybe because they didn't see the needs for it, but I'm sure somebody would probably try to develop that at some point.
Yeah, I know years ago they did talk about doing that. I mean, but quite honestly, my personal honest answer would be because I don't think people want to. They don't want to go into something not knowing information, because there is a bias there. And so when they're choosing those candidates, they're looking for the ones that look like them, sound like them, feel like them. I mean, quite honestly, now companies are being held accountable to some of that. So this might be a good opportunity to kind of swing the pendulum back and say, hey, so now you want to put some steps into place to start building more, inclusive environments. Start your processes off without that information, and let's see how many candidates actually come to the table with exactly what you want, who did not look like, sound like, or feel like what you thought you were going to get. And then how do you build off of that, right? But I mean, my honest answer would be because that's the way the system is built. People wanted to know who's coming to the table so they could exclude them off the bat. That's how it was built. So now let's change it.
I'm really glad you mentioned. Oh, sorry, Anastasia. I just want to say one thing. I like that you mentioned that, and I want to even challenge people to start asking this question, right? Ask people if you've ever shown up to an interview and the person interviewing you was surprised about your appearance. Now, if you ask this in different circles, I can guarantee you, circles including Black people, almost everyone is going to have that experience. And it's a horrible feeling, right? So, I mean, I want someone to know what I look like as soon as possible, because I don't want to have that feeling that you thought I was qualified for something, but then you beat me and you were surprised, or I don't even want to say disappointed, but you thought, oh my gosh, you're Black. You know what I mean? So I just want to bring that up, and I want to mention it because I think it's something that we maybe talk about amongst ourselves, but if you're a senior manager or a hiring manager or you're interviewing people, be conscious of that and sort of check your unconscious bias, and definitely be careful not to show that when you're showing up to interview a candidate.
So with that note, Shannon, we're going to wrap it up. I know we have a ton of really great questions that we did not get to, but we are going to figure out a way to get your questions all answered, probably offline via email or something like that. But I want to thank everybody for coming out. Thank you to our panelists for sharing your insights and your experiences. This was very good. It was a good way to kind of start to wrap up the week. As far as I'm concerned, it's Friday Eve. The week is done. Yeah, so Kara, so I'm going to turn it back over to the Tech in Motion team if they have anything they want to say before we leave.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and thanks, Anastasia, for moderating this event. I think it's been a great discussion around diversity and inclusion. And I also just want to thank everyone who joined today's webinar. I hope you enjoyed the discussion and are leaving here with some valuable insights and strategies on promoting diversity and inclusion. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.